Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show.
Every New Beginning by Fencer X. Episode 13. Winter finally began to show her teeth, sinking her claws into the Hogwarts grounds with an early heavy snowfall, and so quickly did the cold pounce upon them that the Hufflepuff-Ravenclaw match had to be postponed a week until the stand's warming charms could be replenished and the pitch cleared of the fresh powder that blanketed the highlands around the castle as far as the eye could see. The blustery, bitter weather outside had more students than usual eager to spend their free hours within the comfort of the castle's charmed masonry, which meant larger DA meetings than usual as well. The room of requirement had no difficulty accommodating the crowd, of course, but it could not manifest more hands with which to lead the training, and even with Harry and his paltry force of student teachers doing their level best, meetings were starting to get out of hand. Still, hectic as it was, Harry kind of enjoyed the chaos. He'd missed the rush of aura missions, and while there was no risk to life or limb teaching a group of teenagers how to cast jinxes and hexes, no more than usual at least, it still left him with a warm, fulfilling sense of accomplishment. But between the DA meetings and their preparation, as well as his own studies and private tutoring sessions with Malfoy, Harry's world was a blur with activity, and before he realized it, winter holidays were upon them. 3 whole months he'd spent here in the past, and he found himself adjusting to it almost frighteningly well. It was like discovering an old pullover in the back of the wardrobe and finding it still fit like a glove, warm and comfortable and easy, when life of late had become distressingly difficult to navigate. Harry was wise enough, though, or worldly enough, rather, to recognize the danger in thinking that way, in feeling that way. This wasn't his home, and these weren't his friends. Well, of course they were, and it was, but the win was all wrong, and he was starting to get a sense of Hermione's urgency concerning the time he was spending here in the past, though perhaps not for the same reasons as she. It was only the longer he existed here, the less he longed to continue his existence there. And much as he might like to do just that, much as he might enjoy Hermione and Ron with a few less lines on their features and their future still bright ahead of them, or the comfort and companionship of all his friends being together in one place, communing, instead of flung to the far corners of the earth wherever their lives and careers might lead them, or even Malfoy and his stiff, stilted attempts at bettering himself and stubborn commitment to doing it on his own terms and with minimal outside aid, prideful asshole that he was. He couldn't. He mustn't. Because he didn't belong here. He'd been given a gift and he was grateful, but equally so was he wary of being greedy, taking more than he'd been offered, presuming too much on what his role was. He was Harry Potter, a walking Saviour complex in wire-rimmed spectacles, and once he'd done his duty, mended what needed mending, then he needed to do as he'd promised Hermione he would, and go back. Go back and pray whatever changes he'd made here would be enough. He'd never been one for prayer, though. The Dursleys had been a church-going family, as was proper, but never had they invited Harry along to a service, nor had Harry ever asked to accompany them. So he was not going to leave Malfoy's future up to chance or prayer or wide-eyed hope. He'd never done so before, after all, being distressingly Gryffindor in all his endeavors, and he wasn't about to start now. He'd given Hermione his word that, if they hadn't sorted out Harry's situation by Christmas, he'd come clean to McGonagall and the Unspeakables about who he was and from whence he hailed, and seek their help in returning himself to his proper plane of existence, which had seemed like an easy enough concession to make back in September, but had become quite the source of stress and worry now it was mid-December. Harry recalled, through the veil of memory rendered spotty by the passage of time, that he had spent his 8th-year holidays at the Burrow with Ron and the rest of the Weasley family, much as he'd spent them in the several years previous, outside of course, their little camping trip across the English countryside in what would have been 7th year. This time around, though, he was thinking about staying on at Hogwarts, a decision with which Ron disagreed most heartily, even more so on hearing Harry's reasoning. "To keep Malfoy company?" Ron blustered. He's got his own house he can go and spend Christmas at, can't he? Leave off with him for 2 weeks, Harry, honest. Well, yeah, he does have the manor, but his dad's in Azkaban, of course, so it'd just be him and his mum rattling around in a place you know as well as I they were practically prisoners in. Well, bad luck. Some of your friends were actually prisoners there. Then you can see why he might not view it as a home of any sort. Besides, I think his mum's spending the holidays in the south of France. At least he was pretty sure it was just for the holidays. To his recollection, she hadn't moved there for good until after Lucius's death, but perhaps the Malfoys had apartments there for seasonal use. It certainly sounded better than spending a dreary winter in Wiltshire. So he can go stay with her in France, then, Ron said, too eager. Best to be with family at Christmas, I always say. They can throw up a great big gaudy tree in the dining room and string up tinsel and fairy lights and glittery baubles while Celestina Warbeck serenades them with my Christmas cauldrons bubbling over. They'll have a grand old time. It's France, Ron. Malfoy's not allowed to leave the country. And even if his mum wanted to come back for the holidays, the manor's hardly fit for human habitation. Sounds like it'd suit Malfoy just fine, then. Harry gave him a hard look. This was going about how Harry had expected, but not how he'd hoped. And Ron whirled on Hermione, face drawn. Help me talk some sense into him! Hermione bit her lip, expression suggesting she was no more thrilled with Harry's decision than Ron was, though less hysterical, but not too terribly surprised. Harry, I know you've gotten, fond of Malfoy. Ron made a noise of despair deep in the back of his throat and threw an arm over his eyes as he flopped back against the common room sofa. And it's kind of you to be concerned about him, seeing as this will probably be his first Christmas alone. Ron laughed, a bit manic, which is entirely down to his and his household's commitment to the lofty cause of slaughtering muggles and muggleborns. Let's remember that, shall we? Because I feel like maybe we're starting to forget it. But everyone will miss you terribly. Right, Ron shouted, triumphant. Right, Bill and Fleur are supposed to be coming, and Charlie will be in from Romania, and it just won't be the same if you aren't there with us, mate. Then Harry huffed, groping for a solution. I'll talk to McGonagall about using a flue to come for Christmas morning. How's that? Ron did not seem satisfied with this compromise at all, and Hermione had to pat him on the leg placatingly while he looked like he wanted to tell Harry exactly how that was. I don't really want to mention this, but... Then don't, Hermione pleaded, holding her hands up. Harry ignored her, barreling ahead. But Malfoy's dad, Lucius Malfoy, He glanced around the common room, though at this hour it was largely empty, and they'd thrown up a muffliato besides. He dies on Christmas Eve, murdered by another inmate in Azkaban. Oh my goodness, Hermione said, voice soft with shock, and her pallor went grey as she leaned into Ron for support. Harry nodded. Yeah, so if it happens the same way this time? What do you mean, if it happens the same way? Hermione narrowed her eyes at him. Did you meddle in Malfoy's dad's affairs as well, Harry? He can't leave well enough alone with these Malfoys, can he? Ron moaned. Maybe, but only a tiny bit, and I tried to put it back how it was, so it might not have made any difference. Anyway, the point is, if he's stuck here all alone and he gets an owl telling him his dad's just been murdered, well, he shouldn't have to go through that by himself, should he? Sounds like he got through it fine before, Ron muttered darkly, and Hermione pinched him. Harry looked at them both in turn. I just think this is where I ought to be this year. I mean, I can't exactly invite him to the Burrow. You got that right! Ron shrieked, aghast, and Harry mustered a grudging smile. You've both been amazing, supporting me through all this shit, so trust me on this one. I swear I'll be there for Christmas morning, bright and early, with presents. Better have presents, Ron grumbled under his breath, and Hermione pinched him again, but more fondly this time. I suppose, but owlness every day at least, Hermione said. I'm spending the bulk of my holidays with my parents. Lots of research left to do, as I'm sure you're aware. But I'm visiting the Burrow for Christmas Day lunch as well, and Molly's invited me to stay after Boxing Day so I can head back to King's Cross with them once the break is over. Harry sailed right past the insinuation he hadn't been pulling his weight with the Ouroboros research, even though he clearly hadn't. Brilliant, then. I'll see the both of you on Christmas and back again once the new term starts. Ron's expression was still torn, the corners of his lips firmed. You sure you want to spend the whole Christmas holiday here, stuck with Malfoy? Minus Christmas Day, remember? Ron rolled his eyes. And it's not so much that I want to. Ron rolled his eyes even harder. It's just, I don't want all the progress we've made to go to pot, yeah? This business with his dad might set him back, emotionally. Ron muttered something that Harry thought sounded a bit like "know a lot about Malfoy's emotional well-being, do you?" before sighing dramatically. "Well, you're going to have to be the one to explain the situation to Mum, because no way am I wading into that, so enjoy that conversation." Keen to remain on his friend's good sides, now he'd obtained their tacit permission to spend his winter holidays keeping Malfoy company, Harry spent more time than usual the final few days of the term in the Gryffindor common room, piecing through dusty old tomes Hermione heaved into his lap for research and letting Ron continue his streak of utterly thrashing Harry at wizarding chess. "I'll expect an improvement in your strategy when we get back," Ron said as he was packing his trunk in their room. "I can't imagine Prissy Pants McDeath-Eater down there didn't have his own personal cavalcade of tutors before he turned 2, so have him play you a bit. He's probably passably skilled." Harry blanched. "And give him another reason to take the piss out of me?" Ron shrugged. "Could be my Christmas present from you." When the hour approached noon, Harry trundled down to Hogsmeade Station, with Ron and Hermione and the rest of the Hogwarts students heading home for the holidays, helping them put their trunks away in one of the cabins after clearing it of first years when he poked his head inside to ask if the free space had been taken. "You'd think I killed a bloke," Harry huffed, watching the students scramble away down the aisle to the next car as he levitated Hermione's trunk into an overhead compartment. "I've left the books I'm not taking with me under your name in the library, Harry," she said by way of thanks. "Just let Madam Pince know and she'll get you set up." "Top of my to-do list," Harry promised. "Christmas lunch will be around about noon," Ron said, just as the Hogwarts Express tooted a steam-sharp warning for non-passengers to disembark. "But flew in whenever you like. Mum would probably do a dance on the rooftop even if you showed up at 3:30 in the morning." Harry dodged a pair of Hufflepuff Slytherin prefects stalking down the aisle, berating the underclassmen from their respective houses for running in the carriage. "I'll be there bright and early. Wouldn't miss Molly's holiday cooking for the world." "Just remember you could be eating it every day for the next 2 weeks, Ron called as Harry broke into a little jog, prefects be damned, and made his way back onto the Hogsmeade Station platform. He turned back just as the door slid shut, waving at Hermione and Ron and their little compartment. Ron had his face pressed up against the glass, mouthing something Harry couldn't make out, but was probably a rundown of all the dishes Ron would be enjoying in the next 48 hours that Harry would have to miss. He took his time returning to the castle, foregoing a warming charm and transfiguring the little puffs of steam his breath made in the chill air into his and his housemates' initials. He'd reached the entrance hall and just made it through everyone from his year, about to start on Jenny's, when he nearly ran smack into Malfoy, slinking from the great hall with a basket of what smelled like warm Cornish pasties and an apple tart tucked under his robe. "What are you doing here?" Malfoy barked, clutching his basket protectively to his chest and doing a fair imitation of the snotty tone he'd taken the first time Harry had barged in on him while he'd been sulking in the room of requirement. "Walking," Harry said, "or attempting to." He sniffed at Malfoy's treat-filled basket. "Got enough for 2? I haven't had lunch yet." "Well, no," Malfoy started, then straightened, angling himself away so Harry couldn't make a grab for the basket. "No, of course not. What are you doing here?" He glanced over Harry's shoulder to the imposing wooden doors guarding the entrance hall. "You didn't miss the train, did you? Good gad, Potter, I realize you've got the organizational faculties of a troll, and it's been a hot minute since you last graced these halls with your presence, but term ends on the same day every year." Harry shot an arm out, snagging a pasty before Malfoy could blink, and he'd already taken a bite by the time Malfoy shrieked in protest. "Didn't miss it," he said around a mouthful. "Not going." Malfoy recoiled at the sight of his open-mouthed chewing, promptly banishing the basket up to the 7th-floor corridor and out of Harry's reach. His practice with his true wand had helped him learn to manage the finicky responses of his ministry-approved wand, such that now he could manage a few select spells with a deftness none would suspect. Just a bit of mortar to help plug the chinks in his crumbling wall of pride. "What do you mean you're not going? Of course you're going. You have—" Malfoy waved his hand weakly in the direction of Hogsmeade. "Weasleys. Too many of them to count." "I mean I'm not going," Harry said, swallowing hard around the last of the pasty and licking his fingers daintily, because the expression of horror Malfoy wore as he watched, somehow unable to look away, was entirely too entertaining. "I'm sure I mentioned it." "I'm sure you did not." "You're right, I didn't. Because you didn't ask." "Because I don't care." "Then why are we having this conversation?" "Because," Malfoy started, and then seemed to realize he hadn't decided how to finish the sentence, so he made a frustrated sound in the back of his throat and sighed. "Why on earth are you hanging around here instead of fucking off to the Warren? The Burrow? Good gad, I made that up. Don't tell me that's actually what they call their home." Malfoy pinched his nose, breathing slowly. "Just Answer the fucking question. Give me another pasty and I might. To his surprise, Malfoy summoned another plateful that had freshly materialized on the Slytherin tables and sent it zooming ahead of them up to the room, letting Harry explain himself along the way. He had to be delicate about it, Harry reminded himself, because Malfoy was a prickly, sensitive sort who, if he thought he was being pitied, would not react kindly to Harry's genuine gestures. So he framed his decision to linger in the castle over the break in the most academic and austere language he could manage. Well, my newts aren't going to pass themselves. Malfoy gave him a withering look as they tromped up the steps, pausing only at the 5th-floor landing as the staircases rearranged themselves above. Are you seriously intending to still be here come May? Haven't you been offered a free pass into your cushy aurorship on graduation? I still fail to see why you'd go through the trouble. I intend to be here however long it takes, and as I'm certain I mentioned before, I earned my spot on the force on my own merits, respectable newt scores and all. You should well know there's something to be said about earning your spot on a team instead of being handed it on a platter. Malfoy gave a grudging little grunt under his breath that Harry took to signal his resounding agreement. Quite the academic spirit you've cultivated in these recent months, Potter. What can I say? I have an unquenchable thirst for learning. And this passionate quest for edification is, of course, in no way an excuse for you to hover about me as if I were a delicate flower, liable to wilt into despondence at the notion of having to spend my holiday alone, or turn to a life of crime and debauchery the moment you glance away. Harry shook his head, perhaps with more gusto than was merited. Absolutely not. I'm stricken you'd think so little of me. Because, and perhaps it's escaped your notice, the timeline is changing. You've admitted as such yourself. Malfoy turned on his heel once they reached the 7th-floor landing, holding Harry's eye as he marched backwards towards the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy. Your incessant mothering is in all likelihood entirely unnecessary. That's why you think I stayed, to mother you. Harry forced a barking laugh. I've met your mother, Malfoy. I've no intention of trying to take her place. A wise decision. You're entirely lacking in the black's exquisite facial proportions. Harry rubbed his chin. Our facial proportions are all right. But forgive me if I'm less than convinced your decision to hang back hinges entirely on academic pursuits. You're stupid, Potter, but you aren't stupid. Harry drew to a stop in front of the stretch of hallway where the door to the room would appear once they summoned it, settling back against the smooth, solid stone wall. He crossed his arms. That was almost a compliment, I think. Malfoy wrinkled his nose. Oh, my mistake. You are stupid, after all. I'm really not here to mother you, or hover, or any other synonym you might conjure to suggest you think I'm staying behind because of you. Malfoy scooped up the waiting baskets of pasties and tarts he'd sent ahead, letting them dangle from both arms. No, Harry said, with what he hoped was more confidence. I only don't relish the idea of spending 2 weeks stuck in close quarters with two friends who'll be making eyes at each other or hounding me about getting on with our Ouroboros research, I'm not sure which is worse, and an ex-girlfriend who I'm pretty sure isn't entirely over me yet and might see the Christmas season as the perfect chance to corner me into some mistletoe and suggest we make another go of it. Trouble in paradise on all fronts, is it then? Harry decided to take a walk, focusing his thoughts as he did so. I need a place where we can have a nice private conversation without anyone bothering us. I love them, all of them, including Jenny, I really do, but, well, he shrugged full bodily. They're different people here. Different from the ones I've grown up knowing. They're young and small-minded, and they think things are important that aren't important, and they think things aren't important that are. He was babbling now, even he could hear it, and he expected Malfoy to return with a derisive scoff or another cruelly mocking taunt about how truly terrible Harry had it. But I'm young, he said instead, and I imagine I'm different too. He was, at that, on both points. I wouldn't know, though, would I? The door to the room of requirement popped into view, and Harry leaned on the handle, pushing his way inside as Malfoy followed with his baskets full of pastries swinging from his arms. And it's not about age. It's only 7 years, recall. It's everything that's happened in those 7 years. The weight of experience. Harry frowned to himself, sinking into his familiar armchair with an inward sigh. He glanced up at Malfoy, who had set his baskets on a sturdy carved wooden table already set with 2 places. Sometimes I just miss them, is all. He drummed his fingers along the arms of his chair. At least with you here, I'm not reminded of what's gone. Only what you could have had, Malfoy said, too soft to be mistaken for the haughty boast he might have meant it, half daring Harry to shoot him down. He decided to let it stand. It was the season of giving, after all. So, yeah, I'm all right with a bit of space for a couple of weeks. No DA meetings, no classes, no scrambling to find a potions partner before I'm stuck with Ginny, at least not till next term. She's your ex-Potter, not a leper. Malfoy tapped the empty glasses on the table, which promptly filled themselves, presumably from the thermos that had been tucked into one of the baskets between the Cornish pasties and apple tarts. Harry was on his feet in an instant, suddenly ravenous from the long climb. Yeah, I know, but I just don't want to give her false hope. Seems like she's still in the mindset to interpret any small kindness as an indication I'm open to starting things up again. False hope, Malfoy repeated with a sniff, delicately placing 2 pasties apiece on their plate and laying a stasis charm over the baskets with his hawthorn wand he'd pulled seemingly from the ether, so deftly had he palmed it. Harry's heart thrummed with pride to see Malfoy so familiar with it once more, when he would have been happy to see it snapped in half only a few months earlier. I suppose that means you've no intention of taking up again with Girl Weasley? Didn't before, still don't now. Harry shrugged, slipping into the polished wooden bench as he reached for a pasty. Your squadrons of fans must have been heartbroken. I'm quite certain I read your romance described as one for the ages in some profit article or another. Harry wrinkled his nose, recalling well those awkward few months when he'd avoided any and all interactions with Ron's parents, worried they might think less of him for not settling down with Ginny as so many had expected, Harry included. It had taken Arthur cornering him one Hogsmeade weekend with a stern but well-meant talking to for Harry to recognize he'd always have a place in their home, lawfully bound or otherwise. He poked at his pasty, momentarily bereft of an appetite. It felt like the first decision I'd ever gotten to make on my own, so I made it. You dumped her as an act of rebellion. Merlin, but you were sorted wrong. It wasn't rebellion, Harry protested, except it kind of had been, of a sort. He'd probably have been content, carrying on with Ginny and on, until a few mini Harry and Ginnies popped up and made Harry remember that, once upon a time, this had been his dream. A family. A unit wholly devoted to him and to whom he could wholly devote himself and never ever be disappointed. But there would have always been a part of him, small and locked away in a little mental cupboard, that wished for something different. Something no one had seen coming, least of all him. I just needed to see. If I could do it. Be happy doing something other than what people expected of me. Malfoy gave him a long look, fingers curled around a silver fork that he held like a wand. And did it work? After a fashion. Of course, then he'd gone and joined the Aurors and kept on doing that saving people bit for which he was so renowned, so he hadn't exactly seen the thread he'd begun to pick at all the way to its unravelling, had he? But while that quiet flirtation with the unexpected had not solved all of his problems, he still thought he was better off for it, all things considered. Turned out better for her than for me, I think. I believe you made mention of a Quidditch career and a captaincy. Probably sounds better to the ear than Harry Potter's wife. Harry rather thought Ginny might still have had her harpy's position and lucrative career even if they had stuck it out together, but she certainly wouldn't have had Lisbeth. Yeah, there's that, and also a ring on her finger, from a teammate. Malfoy frowned. Aren't the Harpies an all-women's team? You should have insulted Ravenclaw. Harry sighed. Lisbeth's all right. Doesn't talk much, but then Ginny never shuts up once she's gotten going, so they balance nicely. They're good for each other, so I wouldn't want to do anything that might jeopardize it. Like making myself conveniently available at the Burrow while Ginny's still waving around that torch she's carrying for me. Malfoy said, lifting a brow and twirling his fork around before hacking into one of the pasties as he used it to saw off a chunk. So you'll meddle in my life, but not others. 1, put that fork down and eat your pasty with your fingers like a civilized person. And 2, the others aren't dead, or as good as. In a brazen act of defiance, Malfoy stabbed the bit of pasty he'd managed to separate out with his fork and then popped it into his mouth. The heathen. So, he said, throat bobbing as he swallowed. No one else, then? Harry decided Malfoy's pasty habits were too gruesome to watch, so he forced his attention back to his own plate. Pasties first, then apple tarts waiting after. What? He stabbed at another bit of pasty, waving it tauntingly at Harry. No one else, then, after her? And suddenly it hit Harry like the Hogwarts Express. He was 7 minutes and counting into a casual conversation with Draco Malfoy about Harry's love life. Harry never had these sorts of chats, even with Ron, at least not until they'd both partaken of a few rounds of the Leaky's finest, so how exactly had it come to this? The juice Malfoy had swiped from the Great Hall wasn't spiked, Harry didn't think, but then that would mean they'd meandered around to this topic freely, through the general course of conversation, and that was just absurd. He wasn't Malfoy's friend, and Malfoy wasn't his, yet here they were, enjoying a private picnic while they gossiped about romantic relations like a pair of old biddies. Harry straightened, clearing his throat softly. "Well, no." "No?" Malfoy said, actually sounding shocked. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong with me," Harry snapped. "I've just been busy is all." "No one's too busy to shag, Potter." Harry went beet red. When had shagging entered the picture? Malfoy had only asked him if he'd been seeing anyone. But then Harry was 25, and generally by that age, if you were seeing someone and were amenable to that sort of thing, and Harry was very amenable, very, there was likely to be some degree of shagging going on as well. "Well, they are if they're an aura." "Codswallop," Malfoy snickered, reaching for another pasty from the basket, fingers and all. "If that's the case, you're not doing shagging right. Do you need to be tutored in that as well?" Harry fought the urge to bash his head against the table in a desperate bid to rid his brain of the abruptly conjured mental image of Malfoy, dressed in some strappy leather harness outfit while holding a riding crop instead of a wand, and snapping orders at him with Snape's characteristic superior sneer. "Put your back into it, Potter, and try to come second for once in your life." "No, I do not need to be he started, before considering Malfoy might demand a demonstration of some sort if he made such a boast. No, it was clear from the way Malfoy had angled his body, relaxed and lazy, with a devious little grin curling his lips, he was thoroughly enjoying putting Harry on his back foot with such suggestions. Well, two could play that game. He shoved a whole pasty into his mouth. "And what about you?" he demanded around his massive bite. "What about me?" Malfoy cocked his head. "Are you propositioning me? I might have said no flat out just a moment ago, but now I've seen what you can fit in your mouth, we might have something here." Harry fully choked on the pasty, banging his chest with his fist and groping desperately for his glass of juice, which Malfoy daintily nudged into his grip. After 2 long minutes, during which Harry deliberated, spitting the pasty back out onto the plate, he'd finally managed it down to a size it wouldn't block his windpipe, and with a swallow that nearly brought tears to his eyes, he panted, open-mouthed, until he got his breath back. Malfoy watched him, bored, and continued to use his fork to divide his own pasty into manageable bites. The least the asshole could have done was offer to Reducio the bit lodged in Harry's throat. "I take it back," Malfoy sighed. "Your gag reflex is clearly shite. I'm no longer amenable to your overtures." "Wasn't making any Harry tried, trailing off at the end in a coughing fit. "God, you are the worst." "Still think forks are for heathens?" "No, I think—" Harry cleared his throat gently, closing his eyes as he took several deep breaths. "I think spending too much time around you is hazardous to my health." "And took you 14 years to see that? Good gad, and here I thought you'd siphoned at least some brains from Granger over the years. My mistake." Harry pulled a sour frown. "Well, we had been having a perfectly nice conversation." "And we still were, by my mark, until you propositioned me." "I wasn't Harry nearly bit his tongue, wiping a hand over his face. "I was merely turning your question back on you. It's part and parcel of a chat, such as we were having. The free give and take of information. I know you're partial to hearing yourself talk, but in House Gryffindor we like to be equitable about our conversations." Malfoy leaned forward, fist braced under his chin as he fixed Harry with a riveted gaze. "That sounds absolutely fascinating. Tell me more, I really must get into this, if House Gryffindor is about it." And then Harry saw it, clear as day. He saw the whole exchange for precisely what it was, a diversion. Here was Malfoy again, so perfectly mirroring himself 7 years hence that Harry was astounded he hadn't seen it before. Years of aura training and longer in the field, and it had taken nearly hacking up a lung to notice. God, he was going to be a wreck once he found his way back to Robards. He'd be demoted back to patrolling Diagon Alley like a trainee, for sure. Because this was what Malfoy did when he was uncomfortable, when he didn't want to talk about something, when he wanted to watch Harry squirm. rile him up, make him uncomfortable, and maybe Harry would be so caught up in his own anger or irritation he'd forget to press Malfoy. He'd done it in the cell in Azkaban, and he was doing it again here, being an insufferable little shit so Harry couldn't get the upper hand on him. So he'd always have the high ground, safe and secure and sure of himself. He straightened, swallowing. "Are you going to answer, then?" "My question. I asked you if you were seeing anyone. It only seemed fair, since you were haranguing me about my love life, to have you spill about your own. If there was anything to speak of, that is." Malfoy went a bit tense across the shoulders, the languidity in his pose drawing just a bit tighter. "Think I can't get a girlfriend?" he asked, tone gone frosty. "Thought you had one for a while there, to be honest. Parkinson." Malfoy rolled his eyes. "If a Krupp trundles up to you begging for scraps, are you obliged to feed it?" "You're calling Parkinson a Krupp? I don't think she'd like to hear that. And if you know what's good for you, she won't." Malfoy shook a finger at him in threat, then crossed his arms over his chest, shrugging. "You've seen I spend most of my waking hours in this room when I'm not in class. What do you think my relationship status is?" Was this a trick question? He didn't want to step in it, even if it was perfectly common knowledge few were willing to be seen being friendly with Slytherins after the war, let alone romantically entangled. Plus, your prospects were likely even more dismal if you had a dark mark on your arm. Harry decided to be diplomatic about it. "Well, I mean, there's your sleeping hours, and I don't know what you lot get up to in the dungeons." Another salacious image manifested itself wholly unbidden in his mind, and he instantly regretted his wording. "First you proposition me, and now you're fantasizing we get up to wild orgies at the weekends." Malfoy tutted under his breath. "Sounds like someone needs an augmenti to the face." Harry closed his eyes and counted to 10 and told himself he did not regret not going to the Burrow. Not even a little bit.